Welcome to Impact the World, a podcast from West Park Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. This is where we discuss topics related to how we can all love God, love people, and impact the world. Here's your host, Tara Hayes.
I'm your host, Tara Hayes, and I'm in the middle of a little, I call it a mini-series. During the month of August, the church focused on faith and family, and on August 13th, we offered one-time classes during the 9:15 hour. And since, like I've said before, you can only be in one place at a time, you couldn't go to all these classes, but there was so much great material that I wanted to sit down with the leaders of these classes and just have a discussion. So today I have my official co-host, Jake Bishop.
What's up?
Hi. And soon-to-be co-host, also, Joe Kappel. How are you?
What? Didn't know.
You're getting to the point where you've been on here enough times that we're gonna have to, I don't know, we'll have to give tiers or titles. I don't know how that's gonna work.
At least a free coffee mug for
right
unofficial work hours.
Like maybe once you get to the fifth time, I've co-hosted 5, I don't know, Impact the World podcasts.
I did hear someone the other day compare him to Tim Mackey from the Bible Project podcast. So like that's pretty big. I mean, that's a popular podcast. So like he's like our Tim Mackey.
There you go.
Oh man.
Do you want us to call you Joe Tim or Tim Joe?
Nope.
Okay. Good to know. But so, anyway, seriously, today's topic, raising kids in the digital age. I feel like this could be a podcast that could actually be like a 6-parter, 7-parter.
May need to be.
A whole, this, I mean, honestly, there's so much that could be covered. But let's start the conversation today.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at you, Jake.
Great.
I'm going to ask you to start it.
That may be a really good idea to turn this into 6 or 7, because me and Joe in our class, we made it clear we're just trying to start a conversation. This is something you can't cover in 45 minutes to an hour because it's such a big, just pervasive thing that we're dealing with. Yeah. Right? And then we'll probably laugh if we came back and listened to this in 10 years. Like, if we start naming the technologies we're worried about now with our kids, right? Like, right now we're, Chat GPT came out like within the last year. So, I mean, like if we listen to this down the road, it would be like, wow, we never anticipated where technology was going to go, I'm sure. And so this is just something that as a church, we have to have this conversation. For ourselves, we've had that conversation on the podcast, I think, talking about digital Babylon, which I'll talk about here in a bit. But also as we're trying to raise kids. Because, I always go back to Romans 12:2. Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. So when we're thinking about formation, when we're thinking about how we're formed into the image of Jesus, we also have to remember that we're not on neutral ground. There's always this formation is always counter formation. We're countering the effects of the world, the flesh, and the devil, which are trying to conform us to the image of the world. Pushing back. And so as we're thinking about our kids, we are raising them in what I've called, I got this from David Kinnaman, digital Babylon, a foreign land with foreign gods and foreign customs. When they go on social media, when they, check out the new Netflix show, like that's what it is. And so as we think about formation, we have to think about counter formation. And so that's what we were just trying to do in this class. So.
It's a big task for a 45-minute class.
It is. Yep. And I don't know that we didn't scratch the surface, but hopefully it was helpful, and hopefully we'll get conversations going is what we're hoping.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah, that's one of the very things you said at the beginning of that equipping hour. It's just the hope that people would reach out to us.
Yep.
And that's still our hope.
Yeah, because, I mean, I know the thing is, I don't think anyone, especially, I mean, all of us, you're listening to this podcast on a probably iPhone or whatever. So technology has an effect on all of our lives, but especially if you're raising kids, I don't think anyone's immune from this of not wanting to learn more about this. I would hope, because it is such a thing that we're dealing with. So I mean, I'll go ahead. I have some just numbers here. I'll just give the fire hydrant of data. I don't think I have to actually convince people this is a thing, but just if you're wondering, here's some stuff I found interesting. There's a ton of data out there, but this was fascinating to me. First of all, so a recent survey found that 77% of teenagers and young adults answered yes when asked, when nothing is occupying my attention, the first thing I do is reach for my phone. So that's 77% of teenagers. I mean, it's probably like every
95% of adults.
of everyone, right? I always say my 91-year-old grandma does the same thing. Like, so it's not just a teenage problem. Here's another one. On average, teenagers spend over 7 hours a day on their phone.
Wow.
So how I mean, if you sleep 8 hours, how long are you awake? Is that 16 hours a day you're awake? And
And
so
think about all the hours you're in school
exactly
that you're not. So
yeah, I was speaking at a camp with teenagers a couple weeks ago, and we were having this conversation, and they were talking about how like their day can literally, if they don't draw boundaries around it, their day can literally be, they wake up, their alarm goes off, they grab their phone, they check social media. They're on social media all morning. They get to school, they put their phone up, they listen to their teachers all day. And then they go to, practice or whatever. And then they go back, they get their phone, they come home, they watch Netflix, they fall asleep on the couch, eventually move to their bed, wake up, repeat the whole
start
thing.
it all over.
And actually, Cal Newport has this phrase for this he calls solitude deprivation. So we're the first generation ever that can actually live an entire day never being alone with our own thoughts, because they're constantly just intaking information. That's just
And wouldn't
coming
you
at 'em.
say that's like people are afraid to be alone with their
Oh,
thoughts by
absolutely.
themselves.
Yeah.
They're afraid of the silence.
Yes.
That
Yeah, because our anxieties come
Yeah.
to the surface, our fears come to the surface. Whatever our, I was telling them. So I was down at this camp, and I had some time during the day just for silence and solitude to be by myself. And I was even admitting to these students, I'm like, it was so weird. Like I do this all the time, and I'm alone, just trying to spend time with the Lord, and like these like memories from high school are coming up, and I'm like, why did I do that thing? Like I'm horrible. Like why did like all these like regrets are coming up.
that one
And
thing that you said 20 years ago.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, why did I not say this? Whatever. And so it's hard. So we try to drown that out. I heard one comedian say, why do people text and drive? It's because like risk ruining their life, risk killing someone, risk their own life. It's because we can't be alone with our thoughts for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a deeper, it's masking a
Right.
deeper problem. Here's some other stuff. So the average American checks their smartphone 81,500 times a year. So that's once every 4.3 minutes of their waking life. The average American boy will spend over 10,000 hours playing video games before their 21st birthday, which is fascinating because that's, Malcolm Gladwell popularized the 10,000 hour rule. Like that's how long it takes to master something.
Oh my goodness.
They're all becoming video game masters. Here's a just an interesting thing from recently. It was a couple months ago. The U.S. Surgeon General came out with a report suggesting that we're in the midst of a loneliness epidemic, which is just fascinating, right? Because this whole point of social media, the whole point of our technology often is to connect with people, but actually we're more lonely than ever before. And so that's, and then we're not even getting into, the pervasiveness of pornography and things like that, but just the stuff that isn't inherently sinful stuff. It's just taking up our time and our attention. I heard one author say, we don't actually, for a lot of us, the biggest temptation isn't to walk away from God. It isn't to turn to atheism. It's that we're actually distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion.
Wow.
It's not that, Satan, if he can't turn us away from God, he'll just distract us to the point where we don't even think about God.
Yeah.
So I think that's me trying to capture a little bit the problem that we're facing. So.
You did mention something that I didn't expect, and you related us back to and encouraged us to think about the Amish community.
Yeah.
So why don't
Okay,
you tell
that's
the
a good-
listeners a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
Joe's starting his beard. He's ready.
That's true. You would fit in.
I just have to shave off my mustache, and I fit right
There we
in.
go.
Yep.
You're close. And Joseph, like that just works.
Yeah.
Like you just,
We can do that.
it's good.
Joe's like, no.
After hearing your stats, I'm about ready to.
Okay, good. Yeah, I had a line in the class. I said we need to take a lesson from the Amish, and I'm not, giving these stats and saying let's go off and adopt everything the
Right.
separatism of the Amish or anything like that. But I do think this is something that's fascinating. And I don't know, I need to do more research into this, but I at least know with some Amish communities, we tend to think of the Amish as completely rejecting technology. But actually what a lot of Amish communities will do instead is they don't completely reject technology, but they're very slow to adopt new technologies. And so you'll actually see with some communities, you'll see they have the nicest tractor you've ever seen to help them with their work, right? Like they have all these things, but the tractors have wheels that won't go on the road because they don't want to use that as a technology to move on the roads. And so what they'll do is they'll actually, and I learned a lot of this from Cal Newport's book, Digital Minimalism, which is super helpful. Not a Christian book, but a helpful book on this topic. And he talks about how the thing that they'll do is they will, have someone, they'll put someone forward to test out new technologies. So let's say the iPhone comes out. They'll have someone test that out.
Wow.
And then make a determination whether this will benefit our community or will hurt our community.
Wow.
And so they don't, because we have this tendency, I think, to think, oh, this new thing comes out, let's just adopt it. Oh, there's an iPad, and my kid likes the iPad, so I'm going to give my kid the iPad. That's the thing. And I think, unfortunately, because we haven't thought critically about these things, and we've just adopted things without actually testing them and thinking about them. So all that to say, as we're talking about this, like you do not have to adopt every technology that comes out just because it comes out. It could be helpful to you. So that's all I'm at is ask, is this helpful to me and my family?
Right.
Will this bring us closer together? Will this make us look more like Jesus? Because I was just thinking, for me, I've found in my life, just personally, and probably just due to my age and growing up, always kind of having it around, I have to take great pains to get technology out of my life because I feel it's pulling me away from Jesus often and deforming me more than it's forming me. On the flip side, I remember listening to I think it was John Piper, talk about his iPad. And it sounded like he was going to cry. but because for him, right, he's like, I have access to the Bible in so many different translations anywhere I go. I have access to this theological library. I have access to these podcasts. And so he has this different perspective, like this is helping me become like Jesus. And so it's not all bad. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not like throw it all out no matter what. But like you have to ask for you, is it conforming you to the world? Is it conforming your kids to the world? Or is it helping you to grow into the image of Jesus? And that's the questions we have to ask, not just adopt it and never think about it. So that's why I say be like the Amish. At least be like the Amish.
Well, it requires thought about where am I or where are we as a family. It just takes some reflection and being honest with yourself.
Yes. And I know that's hard. I only have my kids, oldest one's about to turn 4. So I don't have the pressure yet of my son coming home from school saying, well, everyone
Daddy,
has this.
everybody.
Yeah, and I know that's coming. And so maybe I'm not the person to speak to this. But at least like for myself, I've incorporated this for myself. And so I hope that other people will think about that with their families.
So Jake, how old were you when you remember, like having a cell phone or having technology like a cell phone or an iPad in the home?
Yeah.
Was there ever a time, now you're 30, was there ever a time when you remember not having that?
I remember getting AOL when we were in 3rd grade, or I was in 3rd grade. So it'd been 2001.
Okay.
But it was like that, like
the train wreck version.
and then but it's like the dial up, and my mom would like yell at me to get off because she needed the phone, like that kind of thing. So that was not really. I think I had AIM, where you could
chatting.
And then I remember the next one would be it wasn't super pervasive. We probably got broadband when I was in middle school, where it was a little bit more. I had my first cell phone in 7th grade, but it was like a Motorola Razor. So it wasn't, it was a dumb phone.
Boy, I remember that was cutting edge.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I always wanted one of those.
You
I'd
could
like
flip
one
it
now.
open.
Those are cool.
Yeah. And then
I had one.
I got my first iPhone sophomore year of high school. So so it was enough for me. And social media for me up until high school was MySpace. So it was like, I'm thankful for how old I am, I guess. I wasn't it wasn't everywhere when I was growing up as much as it is now.
Yeah.
So
I'm just thinking this generation we're raising now, they don't remember a time when technology wasn't pervasive and right there in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first time I learned how to do email. I was like in college, okay?
Yeah.
Got my first cell phone after college. And for that, I'll be honest, I'm thankful.
No, yeah. Oh, no, I'm thankful Like, it's yeah. I mean, I don't know, and this is a maybe a bold statement, but I think that one day we're going to look back at giving iPhones to kids and even maybe teenagers, and that's going to be looked at. Actually, I hope it is. It's going to be looked at like giving them cigarettes. Like it's going to be we just didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm just thankful that I
Yeah.
was at least 16 before I got an iPhone. So yeah.
Wow. I think that's really interesting. Take a lesson from the Amish. But yeah, you make the good point of it's not rejecting all technology. We just need to put it in its proper place.
Yep, and that phrase right there is actually from Andy Crouch, his book Tech-Wise Family. So we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
That's been super helpful, and it's just a lot of it's just think about it, right? Like don't just
And I think we're kind of conditioned to do that, to just think, oh, hey, shiny, new, has to be the best.
Yep.
So let's just do it.
Yep.
And again, it just requires that stopping and thinking and evaluating it. Where are we? What does this mean for us?
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Well, Joe, so the way we did the class is I did the problem. Okay, so I got to be the problem guy. We strategically had Joe give some more practical application because Joe, remind me, how old are your kids? I know your oldest is 13. Is
13,
that right?
10, and 8.
Okay.
Wow.
So you're a little bit more in it than I am. I'm preparing to be more in it. So,
and I'm only one step ahead. You know, with so many in our congregation, and maybe even listening today, your kids could be, almost out of the home, and you could be looking back on this topic as, man, I wish more people were talking about this a long time ago. But one of the things that we hope to communicate is that it's never too late to have good conversations. It's never too late to learn good lessons. And it's obviously from Scripture and from our experience, never too late for the Lord's grace.
Mm.
Now, I did try to give 3 principles.
Yep.
And I have to say, these are not rules. These aren't things that I lay down as absolute standards that everybody must conform to. But what I hoped to communicate in the midst of some of the hard realities that Jake shared were ways that we could respond. And, the first thing that I wanted to focus on is just how to help people navigate their response. On the one hand, you could be very anxious about all of this, almost to the point of feeling petrified, frozen and figuring out what to do. And obviously anxiety is bad. The Bible talks about that. Jesus commands us not to be anxious, and especially, in this case about our kids and what they're facing. That's a destructive response. Understandable, but harmful. And then on the other end is, the tendency to live in this unreality of thinking, well, this isn't happening to my kids.
Right.
It's almost, you characterize that perhaps as denial. Some people take that approach where they think, oh, my kids are playing with the neighbors. They're out there. They have their devices. Yeah, they've got the computer or device in their room, but I know my kids, they're good kids.
This would never.
Yeah, and there's the technological side of this, but there's also just the practical safety issue as well, that there are technologies out there that are more neutral, but there are people behind the programs and the social media apps and all of this that do not intend, to nurture and raise our kids in the instruction of the Lord.
That's not their number one thought.
No, and then there are just evil people out there that are seeking to use technology for nefarious ends, and we want to grow in that first principle in wisdom and courage as a family. We can't be loners.
Yeah.
We can't approach this just trapped in anxiety or living in denial. And a verse that I brought out was Proverbs 18:1-2. Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. And I said, whether it comes to like isolating ourselves so that we can indulge in something that technology brings as a forbidden fruit right into our very homes, right into our very pockets, or if we use it to blast out there our opinions about things, without taking time to really understand people and love them and understand them well, this proverb speaks right into the 21st century.
Yeah.
You see that as well, Jake?
Yeah.
Does that stand out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think social media encourages us to really, I like that verse 2, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinions, which could be Twitter or X's.
Right.
That could be their tagline, right? Like that's
If they
kinda
had a
describes
theme
it.
verse.
Yes, that would be
Yeah.
that would be it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't care about you. I only care about what I want to say.
Yes.
This
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as far as families are concerned, we want to foster the type of environment where kids know that they are safe to discuss these things, and they're even safe to fail and to come back to their mom and dad or their guardian to talk over these things. And just I want to encourage the parents out there, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, the guardians raising these kids to recognize God has placed you where you are as a safe place and a safe space for your kids to come back and to talk to you. And if anything, you may be feeling limited by your own failures and your own use of technology. You might feel rather hypocritical laying down a law for kids that you yourself realize you aren't following. You might have 7 or 8 hours of phone time logged every day yourself.
Right.
And so, instead of just, in defeat, going off into our own separate spaces with our devices, feeling like there's really nothing that can change, there's no hope. Instead, make it a point that sometimes put aside the technology, come back together as a family, discuss things that are working, things that are not working. If you've never had the Amish conversation about does the technology work or does it not, then talk about that realistically together.
Yeah.
And then as a guardian, a parent, confess where you have not been using things right. I think if you're willing to take that step, then that will go a long way in helping your kids see, all right, there's some fruit to, admitting this, to confessing this, and then changing just the tenor of your home so that there is a safety in admitting this and setting a course correction.
Yeah.
Go for it, Car.
I was going to say, I think this would be a good time to encourage parents, guardians, all the above. Like that first conversation is probably going to be awkward, but you're going to have to push through that. And the more you have that conversation, but it is setting aside the technology and saying, hey, we need to have a conversation about it, not hide behind it. It's super important just to keep pushing through, and it gets easier. And then they are more ready. They will more readily come to you to have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this just as a challenge, like if you're listening to this and you're convicted because you're saying if I talk about this with my kids, I'm going to be a hypocrite. I mean, let me lovingly encourage you to do something about that, right? like take steps to fight, to change things in your own life. Like that could be the most loving thing that you do for your kids.
Yeah.
I heard this heartbreaking thing the other day. It was a counselor talking, and she said that she's dealing a lot with teenagers. And she says one of the things that she's hearing constantly is how much teenagers just feel ignored by their parents, because even when they're present, they're not, because the parents are on their devices, kind of half listening, not really caring about them. So if you feel convicted by that,
There's a reason.
There's grace, grace abounds.
Yeah.
But do something, right? Yeah, the most maybe change something, and then walk alongside your kid in that. So
Yeah. And I just have this image that just sticks in my head of all of us isolating ourselves with our devices. And to take that first step, it really could be as simple as denying the lie that's in your head, fighting against that lie that says, oh man, it's so bad, nothing's going to change. Things can't change until you take the first step.
Right.
And if you're willing to go and meet your child where they are, your teen, however old they are, and to love them enough to confess your own shortcomings and to create a safe space for them to do the same, that can go a long way. And even teaching and modeling what real life communication is.
Yeah.
We emphasize in the book of Proverbs in this class that, it is growth in wisdom and in courage and moral virtue to share what's going on in your life, to be warned about pathways that are not safe, and to confess it when you've acted as a fool. We all do it, and we all grow together. And the first step really is to model that and to have those conversations. They are tough, but the Lord's grace is enough to get those conversations started.
Yeah. And I think it teaches your kids even more lessons than just about the technology and that one conversation subject. You know, they're learning that, like, conversation and being willing to admit, like, when they're wrong and working through a problem. So, I mean, it's a lot of lessons, not just about the technology.
Yeah. And then principle 2 just follows right along with that. And it's just to have this principle, have conversations often and early. And then in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4-7, it says this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. So the basic principle here is modeled in Deuteronomy 6. If you want to teach your kids, it's going to be more than just one conversation. It's not going to be just the talk.
Yeah.
Right.
It's going to be layers upon layers, day upon day, multiple points of contact with your kids all the time.
Yeah. Well, and then I think we hear that and it's like, okay, we need to talk about, look for discipleship moments, right? We talked about that in the parenting sermon. Look for opportunities to, talk about scripture and bring that in the conversation. But when it comes to this conversation, like, how do you even start that? If that question makes sense. Like, how would I even as a parent?
What does that look like?
Yeah, you have your 13-year-old.
Yeah.
How do I bring those kind of things up?
One of the things that I said, and I'll be a little more tactful maybe going over a podcast here than I was even in the class, but I think, we have to start with teaching kids respect for their bodies and sex and godly relationships. It's a never-ending conversation at certain stages of life, trying to figure out how to relate to the opposite sex. And also just how to understand what's going on with their own bodies.
Right.
So I did encourage the people who attended, use terms that are recognizable and true, anatomically correct for body parts, and for several reasons. One of the quotes that I found in my reading was from a book called Safeguards by biblical counselor Julie Lowe. And she said that children who know and understand how to talk about their body parts and who have been taught privacy and respect for their own bodies and the bodies of others are more likely to report inappropriate behavior when it happens to them. Professionals and law enforcement officials notice that kids who have been taught these things by their parents are less likely to be abused, are quicker to report when they are, and are better able to articulate what has occurred than other children. This is because they have been given both an understanding of what is healthy and normal and the language to describe it.
Wow.
So I think it's super important to understand that. Teach our kids what is healthy and normal and give them the language to describe it. It's a great tip. And I have found so far, and it's not about, having one big conversation.
Yeah.
But it's about having several conversations.
Do you have any advice? Maybe you don't. Maybe it's just like, get over it. Do you have any advice for the parent that's hearing that and goes, that sounds so awkward? Like, I won't. Yeah, okay, great. That's cool. You can do that. I could not do that with my kid.
Yeah, it is awkward.
From what I'm gathering, a lot of parenting is awkward. So,
yeah, that's what my experience has been so far.
I don't believe it, Joe.
And for your kids, Jake, Knox is. I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to say.
No.
Okay, is that
Wait,
cool to
yeah.
say? All right. I don't know if we're naming our children on.
Beep. Beep.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah. I think it's
right.
on the website. So.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
All right.
He's about to turn 4.
Yeah. Probably at that age, you don't have the same level of conversation that you do with an 8 to 10 to 13-year-old. Yeah. And, that range in my own kids' ages requires a finessing of the details.
Yeah.
There are certain things I share with a 13-year-old that I don't share with the 8-year-old.
Yeah.
So this is just growing in wisdom, knowing how to bring these things back into a conversation along the way. Yep. And I talked about in the lesson really just various ways to do this. Yep. Bringing out certain things that are more helpful depending on the age. So, I thought of this tip. Think of what-if scenarios that will help your kids grow in wisdom. And I just gave a couple that occurred to us as a family. With our girls, they tend to play with other kids in the neighborhood. And we've noticed a few times that they'll come back saying, hey, my friend showed me this weird picture on their phone. And so we're not there with them when that happens. And our counsel to them, just is, hey, what if a friend does push a phone in front of you and says, look at this? What would you do when that happens? Our hope is that they would, encourage their friends not to base their playtime or friendship time around devices, but that they would just be kids and that they would play.
Yeah.
So we're trying to encourage our girls especially just to look away and to say, no, thank you. Let's do something else.
Yeah.
There's levels of response that are more helpful. And I know that they've already seen some things that they can't unsee. Thankfully, it's more of the scary stuff than it is the sexual stuff. But that stuff's out there too.
Yeah.
And for the older kids, you could ask teens, what if a person from school texts you a picture that is bad? What do you think are good ways to respond? And it's opening up the conversation so that maybe your teen knows, hey, I know that you could potentially have this happen to you. Maybe it has. That could create an opportunity right then that's just, arranged so that you could have that talk. What is it that you're seeing? Have your friends experience this? Sometimes I think teens are more comfortable saying, adults too, about what their friends are dealing with.
Yeah.
And that could be a bridge into what they themselves are experiencing too. And if you could just respond again, graciously, if your child is in a spot where they feel like they've done something bad, you've got to give them the love and security to come back and to talk to you about it, to know that they're safe.
Yeah.
Kids, little kids especially, are so oriented around pleasing adults, especially their parents. And you just want them to have that sense that no matter what, they are safe to come and to talk to you. So then, when kids get older, and they get beyond that stage where they're thinking so much in black and white, little kids don't tend to think about nuanced issues very much, then really you want to just take advantage of real-time experiences. There's definite times, whether you are, like in the example I used in class, you're walking through the mall and you're seeing the lingerie ads and you're with one of your sons. This example that I got from the Focus on the Family Vice President Danny Huerta, he was talking about doing that with his son and actually gave him a heads up. And he's like, son, don't look to the right as we walk down the mall here, just look to the left. Notices that his son looks to the right a little bit anyway. And when they get to the end, he talks him through that. He doesn't rebuke him, but he asks him, I saw that you looked over there. What is it that you experienced? And used that as a launching point to talk to him about a variety of things. Why we feel attraction, what to do about it when we do, what kind of guidelines God's put in place, like even the type of imagery that you're looking at, how the world is using that woman, and whether God approves of that or not. Of course he does not. So if he doesn't, then what kind of responses should we have as godly men? Or if you're talking with your girl, maybe it's a body image issue. Maybe it's something that relates on that end. So much of the online shaming and online pursuits of young girls is around whether or not they fit a certain image, maybe in their own minds or in the perceptions of their friends. And just being able to talk in a loving way with your daughter about those things to help her to navigate, those tough issues. But to do that in just real time. It's not that you have to have a curriculum that you're working through. Sometimes those help. Sometimes there are like weekends away that you can schedule with your kids, and I know Focus on the Family does some things like that. But what I'm advocating is just taking advantage. It may not be convenient, and you may have to, focus a little bit more. It may not be what you're trying to accomplish right then, But man, it could be just that God's giving you a Deuteronomy 6 moment.
Yeah.
Just take advantage of it and talk it over with your kids.
And it could be life-changing for them. I mean, when you think, when you
Yeah.
put it in, like, give it an eternal perspective, like, this could be a very important conversation to their spiritual formation.
Exactly. One of the things I did at the end of that section was just talk about helpful resources, and maybe we can link to some of these
Oh,
as
yeah,
well.
that'd be great.
You know, very little kids, there's a few books that are helpful just to talk about bodies, and one of them is called God Made All of Me, a book to help children protect their bodies by a pastor, Justin Holcomb, and his wife, Lindsey. And then there is a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. The subtitle is Porn Proofing Today's Young Kids. That's by Kristen Jenson. And this is a book where a mom in the story helps her son to understand the effect of pornography on him and gives him a plan, both to understand what would happen to him in that case and how to respond. Disclaimer here from Jake would be,
The cover is horrible. So I judge books by their cover.
Yeah.
So, and it is awful. So sorry, Kristen Jenson, but yeah, get a
Now I
different
want to see
publisher.
the cover.
yeah, it's got a
I
boy
know
at
a graphic
picture.
designer who can help her.
Yeah. He's got a boy at the table, and he's looking at a device, and he's looking away from it. And it's a watercolor painting. It's not and it's not as good as some of the pictures on the inside of the book.
Okay.
So
Very cheesy.
don't judge a book by its cover. It's actually a very helpful book that's helped us talk to our kids at home, not just about pornography, but just about how we respond when we're feeling something very strongly, and how God can use our thoughts to help us to go to the conclusions He's given us instead of what our feelings tell us about in the moment.
That's great.
Yeah. And then there's a website just called Protect Young Eyes, where a guy has taken the advantage of just kind of pulling together a lot of resources that are helpful. Protect Young Eyes. And so, you know, just as we end, I know this has gone on a bit long, but I did want to end with some general safeguards, some things that Jake has shared, some things that I've shared, and maybe we could just kind of jump on this together, Jake.
Yeah, sounds good.
You know, one of the things that you said at the beginning of yours was, is it wise or beneficial? Do you want to just, you know, reiterate that?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. Again, it goes back to the thing we were talking about. Again, when we're thinking formation, right? Like I think we all, I hope that we want our kids to grow into the image of Jesus, right? And so, you know, I'm not advocating, you know, separating from the world. I'm not advocating. I know, like, but the way I look at it is like we're in digital Babylon. We want to create Daniels that are moving, like are able to move, you know, smoothly through this culture, right? Who are able to interact with the culture, but who are not being conformed to it. And so, yeah, I just think that one of the most loving things that we can do is just make some hard calls sometimes, because our kids don't have the willpower or the maturity to do that. And so the most loving thing you can do is let them be mad at you and not give them something that they can't handle, right? And I don't even think I can make a blanket rule for every kid, but like you know your kid, or you should. Certain kids can handle certain things. You know, like if your kid can't handle Instagram, then and you know that better than your 12-year-old does that. And so I guess the loving thing you can do is be the bad guy in that situation. And maybe I'll look back on this in 8 years when my son's 12 and I'm like, you know, he wants a pet robot or something or whatever it is at that point. And I'm like, well, that's harder. But at least, you know, and be willing for yourself if something is deforming you to make changes that are needed.
Yeah, I was thinking, I don't even think I can handle Instagram. So I don't even try.
Yeah.
But that's a lot to throw at kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, another thing I picked up from a book that Jake recommended, again, that's the Tech Wise Family.
Yep.
And it's that we should initiate times of tech fasting. And this is what the author of that Tech Wise Family said.
Andy Crouch.
His third commitment is this. He said, we are designed for a rhythm of work and rest. So 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, and 1 week a year, we turn off our devices and worship, feast, play, and rest together.
I love that.
Well, and we have I think we did a podcast on Sabbath, right? Just encouraging that. I mean, this goes right along with that, right? If you
Yeah.
have a Sabbath worked in with your family, put the phones away for that. Right?
Yeah.
That's a good time to really focus on each other. I'll say, like, again, to not be hypocritical. Like, we're not perfect at that. We're still kind of playing around as the boys get older with what Sabbath looks like for us. But just if you can, as much as you can throw those guardrails of at least I'm going to step away for 24 hours a week. It's a game changer. So
The other things really are just getting down to the nitty gritty. We talked about engaging parental controls. If you decide that your kid can have an iPhone or an Android phone, there are parental controls on there. And I think it's worth taking the time to understand how those things work. In addition to that, though, you've got accountability software, just an alternate browser, or even having browsers like Covenant Eyes and able to use even now Safari on the iPhone. And, it seems very seamless, but you've got both a filtering app and an accountability and reporting software in the background of everything you do online.
Oh, wow.
And that's very useful. Several of the people that were listening that day in the lecture actually understood what Bark is. And that's another app that enables you to get notifications on your phone if your kids' devices run across anything harmful. That's particularly useful. And I said, in terms of, social media apps, one that I would really limit is YouTube. I'm saying a lot. Sorry, I'm just thinking about this. I'm sorry. I will not try to say that very much anymore.
You're fine. It's fine.
So limiting YouTube is, I think, a decision that every parent at least has to think through. There are two settings to YouTube. There's, again, they're dead. There is totally limited, like kid-proof YouTube, and then totally open. There's no
in-between.
nuance to the in-between settings. Do you know?
I don't
Is
know.
there?
I'm not. We watch Bluey. So
Yeah.
I don't, so
His house is watching
because
Bluey.
you see Blippi is on YouTube, so I try to avoid YouTube because
That's a good
I don't
reason to
do-
avoid
I don't
YouTube.
I don't like Blippi that much. So,
Yeah.
yeah. We've been through Blippi stages, but I just tell Knox that Blippi's asleep. So
Oh, there you go.
Wow,
Yeah.
that works.
he's
Nice.
getting older and smarter, so
like-
not as
Yeah.
much.
Blippi can't
Yeah.
be asleep
No.
24 hours a day,
No,
Dad.
no, and he's getting now where he knows what everything is on. Blippi's on YouTube. Bluey is on Disney. Like it's
Oh, my
so I'm having to adjust.
But since we gave this lecture, I've had parents come to me and say, the biggest challenge I have is just YouTube. YouTube picks up on what you watch and click on one time and it'll
Oh,
give
yeah.
you suggestions. So the more, trashy of the stuff
Yeah.
that you click on, the trashier stuff it's going to keep feeding you. Parents, please be aware of that.
Yeah.
And it could be that you need to make the decision to limit what YouTube access they have, or at least access what they can get to on YouTube.
Yeah, that's good. And then as we kind of land the plane here, there's one more book that I'll suggest, and it's more broad. Technology, I think, is in there a little bit, but I'll ultimately suggest it because it's called The Intentional Father by John Tyson, and it's specifically for fathers to sons, but I think there's some applicable things for other people. But I like his main point, which is we need to be intentional, because often we can parent on autopilot and think that, the student ministry at church, as great as it is, like we have an amazing student ministry, or the kids ministry at church, as great as it is, we have a great kids ministry. We just think they're going to take care of everything.
Yeah. They're only here a short
yeah,
amount
like,
every
it's just-
week.
yeah.
That's
no,
and that's
so-
not their role. So,
Yeah, and you're the parent. You're the primary discipler of your kid. Okay, like no one else. That does not fall. It is not our student director's fault. It is not our kids director's fault. Kid pastor's fault. If your kid is conformed to the image of the world, right? Like, and again, and ultimately, you only have. You're not completely in control of that either. But like, you're the primary discipler of your kid. That falls on you. And so the best thing about that book is Tyson's call just to be intentional. I think that's ultimately, if you want the, too long didn't listen to summary of this podcast, like be intentional, take intentional steps. And and just one more thing, because I heard this the other day and it's just scared me to death. Okay. When your kid goes to just taking all into account, average lifespan, things like that. When your kid leaves for college, you will at that point have spent 93% of the time with them that you will spend with them their entire lives.
Oh, wow.
So in their first 18 years, you get 93% of the time that you will spend with them for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
So that's a short period to be the discipler, right? And
Yeah.
at that point, we have that amount of time to train them up. So that's I was like, I just automatically had a crisis and felt behind. But that's just there's no time. We don't have enough time to not be intentional.
Right.
So.
I think that is probably one of the big keys to this whole conversation. I don't want to say to make it work or whatever, but for it to be successful is the intentionality and pushing past the awkward and listening. Like, if I am convicted about something, then that probably means that I need to change that as well.
Yep.
Wow.
And maybe just take this away. We have not laid down laws for you today, and neither have we given you formulas that will help you raise perfect kids in this digital space. But maybe this is what you can take away. Just be faithful. Be faithful to the things God has given you in this moment. You can't go back years ago and correct things back then, but you can be intentional. You can be faithful in this moment, and God will give you grace for that.
Grace.
If
you haven't been intentional, that we're not beating up on you. Like I remember, that's there's grace.
Yeah.
Right, there is grace.
It's never too late to move in the right direction. Yeah. Well, I think this has been a great conversation. And again, it could be multiple conversations.
Maybe it needs
easily,
to be.
And maybe it will be. But thanks so much, you all, for joining me today.
Thank you.
And all of these fantastic resources that we've talked about, I will list in the show notes. I'll make sure that we've got them.
Cool.
So,
Cue Leanne.
Cue Leanne, here she comes. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for listening to Impact the World. To find out more about West Park Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee, visit westparkbaptist.org.